I still remember the scene so vividly that it feels like it happened just minutes ago. My grandson was sitting on the living room rug, surrounded by the toy cars and building blocks he always scatters around as if he were building his own world. The late afternoon light streamed through the window, creating that soft, golden atmosphere that always makes me feel at peace. But that day, something was different. He was too quiet, too focused, as if his mind were far away, in a place I couldn't yet reach. I called his name. He slowly raised his face, and that's when I noticed something I'd never seen before in his eyes. A silent, deep fear, so great it seemed too big for such a small heart. His hands trembled slightly, and his lips were pressed together, as if he were holding back a painful truth. Then he stood up, walked over to me, and stopped so close I could hear his short breath. He lifted his face, his eyes wide and moist, and said in a low voice, but firm enough to chill my heart, "Grandma, don't open the blue box. Ever." At that moment, the world became strange. His words echoed within me as if spoken in the middle of an empty, cold place. I felt a shiver run down my spine, not because the phrase itself was threatening, but because his tone carried something I couldn't decipher. Children sometimes say strange things, invent stories, repeat lines from movies, but that didn't seem like invention. It was a request, or perhaps a warning. I tried to smile, to ease the tension that was building in the air. I asked very gently, "Why not, my love?" He lowered his head, rubbed his hands together, and repeated, this time almost crying, "Just don't open it, okay? Promise." Promise? Promise without understanding? How could I? I felt my chest tighten. There was a weight accompanying that request, a kind of urgency that didn't match his age, a request that seemed laden with something too big. My gaze instinctively followed the hallway, as if that blue box were there, watching me, waiting. But the truth is, I didn't even remember it properly. It was an old box, stored for years at the back of a cupboard, so forgotten that it was part of the house's landscape. I never imagined it would have any importance to him, or to me, until that moment. I tried to ask another question, but he took 2 steps back, as if afraid I would bring up the subject more than I should. It was as if mentioning the box was dangerous, as if something inside it might awaken if I insisted. I fell silent. I had a clear feeling that he wasn't trying to be dramatic. He was asking for help, in a childish and awkward way, but incredibly sincerely. The house fell silent, the kind of silence that isn't comfortable nor natural, a silence that weighs heavily, a silence that pushes your mind to places you avoid. The ticking of the clock on the wall seemed louder. Even my breathing felt erratic. I stood up slowly, crouched down to his level, and held his cold hands. "Can you tell me what happened?" I asked. But he only shook his head, his eyes filled with suppressed tears, as if he were carrying a guilt that wasn't his, as if he had seen or felt something he couldn't explain. That's when I realized that request wasn't just about a box. It was about his fear of losing something, or someone, maybe losing me. Children sense things that adults ignore. Sometimes they feel it before they understand, and he was feeling something very strong. My heart began to beat faster. The image of the blue box appeared in my mind like a shadow, something that suddenly ceased to be a simple stored object and transformed into a symbol, an enigma, a silent threat. Why was my grandson so scared? Who had spoken to him about the box? Had he seen something? Or heard something? I squeezed his hands tighter and tried to reassure him, even though I myself was starting to tremble inside. He hugged me, and it was a long, tight hug, the kind he only gave when he was terrified. I felt his little heart beating fast against my chest, and in that instant, I was certain of one thing. Behind a simple blue box, there was a hidden story, a story that my grandson couldn't or didn't want to tell, a story that I needed to discover, even if my heart told me not to open that door. But that's where the real suspense lies. When the warning comes from someone you love, do you respect it or investigate? And that dilemma was the beginning of everything. My grandson has always been the light of my life. From the day I first held him in my arms, wrapped in that light blue blanket that seemed to swallow his tiny face, I knew he would be different. These things you feel without needing an explanation, a bond that is born even before any words. He grew up too fast, at least for my heart, and each phase of his life became one of those memories that we keep like photographs deep in our souls. He was always affectionate, the kind who would jump into your lap, hug you tightly, and rest his head on your shoulder while watching cartoons. He was a child who laughed easily, who had the gift of transforming any difficult day into something lighter, with an innocent comment or an unexpectedly profound question. Always curious, always attentive, always observing the world with those huge, bright eyes. He was the type who noticed when I was tired and would ask, "Grandma, do you want me to help you?" In such a spontaneous way that my heart melted. He was also very clever, cleverer than any child his age. He learned to read before his classmates, loved putting together difficult puzzles, and had an impressive memory. If I told him a story once, he would repeat everything, word for word, as if he were storing each syllable in a safe. The teachers always said he had a rare sensitivity, something that made every gesture of his more intense, more genuine. But in recent months, something has changed. Not suddenly. It was like a cloud slowly approaching, barely perceptible at first, but gradually making the atmosphere grayer. First, there was silence. He, who always talked a mile a minute, began to answer with short phrases. Then came the lost looks, that way of seeming distant, as if he were thinking about something that weighed too heavily on such a small boy. He started playing less, sleeping poorly, and when I asked if something was wrong, he would look away, bite his lower lip, and just say, "Everything's fine, Grandma." But it wasn't. A grandmother senses these things. We see beyond what is said. We notice when a smile doesn't reach the eyes, when a hug isn't as firm, when the body speaks more than the mouth allows. I saw the fear hidden in his expressions, a fear he tried to disguise, but which leaked out in the small actions of everyday life. The way he looked through the door before entering a room, the way he held my arm tighter when we went down the stairs, or how he was startled by any loud noise. I tried to ask carefully. I didn't want to pressure him. I didn't want to make him feel even more vulnerable. But at the same time, I desperately wanted to know what was going on. Whenever I brought up the subject, his behavior changed instantly. He became restless, fidgeted with his fingers, stared at the floor, as if he were protecting a secret that scared him, but that he didn't think he could share. And that's where love mixes with worry, because I knew he was suffering in silence. I knew that something or someone had affected him emotionally. But what I didn't know, and this kept me awake at night, was whether he was trying to protect me, or if he was afraid of hurting me. Children have this strange instinct to hold back pain, so as not to hurt those they love. And this sometimes is one of the greatest cruelties of innocence. At the same time, I couldn't help but remember all the moments that built our bond. The afternoons when he baked cookies with me and came out with his face covered in flour. The nights when I put him to bed and he asked me to tell just one more story. And I, of course, always gave in. The times he held my hand in the supermarket as if he were afraid of losing me among the shelves. And that adorable habit of always walking me to the door whenever I left, waving until my car disappeared from sight. That sweet, affectionate, bright boy was now withdrawn into himself. Something had stolen his peace. Something had dimmed a little of that familiar light. And that's precisely why the warning about the blue box affected me so much. Not because it was a strange phrase, although it was, but because it came from him. From my grandson who trusted me with everything. From the boy who told me everything that was in his heart. From the boy who never hid anything from me, until now. When he looked at me with that expression that mixed fear and guilt, I realized that the blue box wasn't just a forgotten object. It was a burden, a symbol, maybe even an answer. It was as if his behavior, the silence, the anxiety, the detachment, was somehow connected to that box. But how? What did he know that I didn't? What had happened to transform a simple box into such a great threat in his eyes? I couldn't ignore it. I couldn't pretend it was just a childish fantasy. Not when his gaze screamed something his mouth couldn't say. And that made me feel a suffocating mix of love and worry. A love that wanted to embrace, protect, and heal. And a worry that squeezed my chest like an invisible hand. The bond between us had always been strong. It still was. But now, there was something in the middle of that bond. Something that needed to be discovered. Something that deep down I already knew. The blue box had more to do with him than with me. And perhaps, just perhaps, understanding my grandson was the key to understanding what that box held. The blue box had always been there. Perhaps that's the strangest part of the whole story. The fact that I lived with that object for so many years without really seeing it. It was like those elements that inhabit the scenery of our lives. Old, silent, almost invisible, but carrying stories that we only perceive when something forces us to truly look. It was kept at the back of an old cupboard, one of those dark wooden pieces that creak when you open the door, as if protesting against being awakened. I rarely touched that cupboard. It accumulated things that were once important, but which, over time, had lost their place to the present. The box was there, always. Available, always quiet, always still. And yet, I never paid it any attention. It was small, smaller than a shoebox, but heavier than it looked. The corners were worn, and the blue paint had lost its original luster. It wasn't a cheerful blue, the kind that evokes summer skies or children's toys. It was a faded, almost grayish blue, as if it had been washed away by many storms and survived through sheer stubbornness. In some places, the paint was peeling, revealing the old wood underneath. The lid had a thin mark, like a scar. I had never wondered where it came from. It was just part of the house. And that's precisely why my grandson's warning sounded so unsettling. How did he, so young, know about the box? How did he know exactly where it was? I myself had forgotten about it for years. That object seemed to have become invisible to me, but somehow not to him. The day the warning echoed in my head, I went to the closet. The door creaked as always, and the smell of slumbering wood reached me. There it was, at the back of the bottom shelf, surrounded by old fabrics, yellowed photographs, and small objects that held memories I thought I had overcome. The blue box, however, seemed different that day. Not because it had changed shape, but because I was seeing it with different eyes. The eyes of someone who had been warned. The eyes of someone who now fears and needs to understand. I approached and ran my fingers over the rough surface. I felt the texture of the peeling paint, the soft coolness of the wood underneath. It was like touching something I knew, but suddenly it felt strange. A feeling that mixes nostalgia and discomfort, like finding an object that belonged to someone you loved, but that also hid secrets that never came to light. I remember thinking that box didn't belong to me. I didn't remember buying it, receiving it, or inheriting it, and yet it had always been there, which made everything even more unsettling. Why had I never questioned its origin? Why? Had I simply accepted its presence as part of the house? Perhaps it's like that with many things in our lives. They remain stored deep inside, accumulating meaning without us realizing it. The lock was small, thin, almost delicate. It didn't seem designed to protect something of great material value. It was more symbolic than functional, an old attempt to preserve memories, feelings, regrets. The wood of the lid had some circular scratches, as if someone had tried to open the box without the key many years ago. Or perhaps it was just time leaving its mark. I didn't know, but that mark seemed like a silent warning. As I observed every detail, it was impossible not to feel that the box carried an emotional weight I had never realized. A forgotten object that somehow remained alive. A silent guardian of something I didn't know if I wanted, or should, discover. Objects can accumulate stories without us noticing, absorbing pain and memories like sponges, and when we finally look at them, attentively, it's as if they're staring back at us. My grandson, without realizing it, had lit a lamp on that forgotten piece of the past, and now I couldn't look away. It was as if the box had come to life, as if it pulsed slightly in the dark, calling to me, inviting me, or warning me. I remembered how it had always been there through all the changes I made to the house. It survived the renovations, the furniture rearrangements, the spring and fall cleanings, and it was never discarded. It was never opened. It was never questioned. And that, for someone like me, who has always liked organization and clarity, didn't make sense. Why hadn't I thrown it away? Why did I have this strange feeling that it shouldn't be touched? Perhaps I always felt, without admitting it, that box held something I wasn't ready to face, something bigger than simple old objects, something that could stir my heart, my memory, my history. Because certain things we keep not out of forgetfulness, but out of instinct. And perhaps I was always afraid of it, without realizing it. That's why my grandson's warning didn't fall on deaf ears. When he said, "Don't open the blue box, ever," it wasn't just a child's phrase. It was as if he had unearthed an old premonition that I myself couldn't name. The blue box, small, silent, forgotten, suddenly became the epicenter of a mystery that enveloped me more than I could have imagined. It was the bridge between the past I had buried and the present that was trying to crumble. Such a simple piece, yet so laden with meaning. And at that moment, I knew that sooner or later, I would have to find out what was inside her, even if it broke my heart. After the warning, everything changed. Not just for me, but especially for him. Until then, I imagined that my grandson's strange behavior was the result of some school worry, a fight with classmates, or even something he had heard at home. But the more I observed his gestures, the more I realized there was a pattern. And this pattern always began and ended whenever the blue box was nearby. The first time I noticed it was 2 days after the warning. I was tidying some towels in the cupboard when my eyes involuntarily fell on the box. It was there, as always, motionless, silent, almost too discreet. But at that moment, my grandson entered the room, and the transformation happened before my eyes. He was laughing, light-hearted, pushing a toy car, ready to show me something. But when he realized I was crouching in front of the cupboard, his face changed immediately. The laughter faded. The hand holding the cart began to tremble. His eyes widened with a raw panic that froze me. It was as if he had seen a ghost, as if the mere sight of the box had triggered an alarm inside him that no one else could hear. He said nothing. He just stood there, motionless, breathing rapidly. And then, when he finally managed to move his lips, he murmured, "Don't open it, Grandma." And he ran to his room. That behavior repeated itself in different ways over the days. Sometimes he would avoid entering the room when I opened the cupboard. Other times, he would abruptly change the subject if the box was mentioned. And at other times, more painfully, he would simply look away, that silent, fearful, averted gaze, almost as if he were hiding something that shouldn't be revealed. There were times when I caught him watching the box from afar, sometimes hidden behind the sofa, with only half his face showing, as if he were trying to keep an eye on the object without getting too close. Other times, he would walk down the hallway and, reflexively, quicken his pace as he approached the cupboard door, as if fleeing from an unseen danger. I tried to ask. Of course I tried. But whenever I tried to delve deeper into the subject, he reacted in a way I would never expect from such a sweet child. He would bite his lower lip so hard it seemed he wanted to silence his own soul. He would start fidgeting with his fingers repetitively, a gesture of anxiety I had never seen in him before. Sometimes he would stare at the floor as if the answer he couldn't give lay there. "Son, why does this box scare you?" I asked one night, trying to keep my voice soft. He was sitting on the sofa, hugging a pillow, rocking slightly. Another clear sign of nervousness. He simply shook his head. No words needed, no explanations needed, only that heavy silence, dense as smoke, and that silence spoke louder than 1,000 words could. It spoke of fear, it spoke of insecurity, it spoke of him carrying something too heavy for his small heart. I began to notice other details, so subtle that only a grandmother could detect them. When he entered the room and the box was visible, his shoulders would hunch. When he passed near the cupboard, his eyes would blink rapidly, as if trying not to look. When we played on the floor and for some reason the box appeared in my field of vision, he seemed to stiffen, completely, as if ready to run. It was as if that box were a shadow in our house, a shadow that only he seemed to truly see. And there was something else, something that deeply disturbed me. Sometimes, when I watched him without him noticing, I saw him looking at the box with a mixture of guilt and sadness, as if he were somehow involved with whatever was inside, as if he had a secret buried deep in his childhood that had suddenly found form in that blue box. What could cause this kind of behavior? What could a child his age associate with such an old and seemingly harmless object? The box had always been there. He grew up seeing that cabinet. So why was it only now that it frightened him so much? My nights began to grow longer, invaded by questions I couldn't answer. I wondered if he had heard something, seen something, if someone had said something to him. The suspicion that something bigger was happening began to grow inside me, a feeling that mixed protectiveness with desperation. I wanted to get the truth out of him, but at the same time, I was afraid of pressuring him too much and making him close himself off even more. And it was in that small space between fear and curiosity that something began to happen inside me. Every time he looked away from the box, I felt a kind of call coming from it, as if that silent object carried an answer I needed, but which was perhaps too painful to reach. The feeling was so strong that it began to follow me around the house. It was as if the box had gained a new meaning, not just for him, but for me too. As if it suddenly occupied a place larger than its own size, as if it were the link between my grandson's fear and a piece of my own history that I had never explored. His fear fueled my curiosity, and my curiosity, in turn, fueled my apprehension. It was a difficult spiral to break. What was in that box that made a child tremble? What did he know, or believe, that I didn't already know? Why did he seem to carry guilt? Every time he got close to her, I wanted to protect him, but I also needed to understand. And so, amidst averted glances, bitten lips, and stifled silences, something became clear to me. The box was not just an object, it was a secret my grandson was trying to keep or hide. The days went by, but that unsettling feeling didn't lessen. On the contrary, it seemed to grow, like a heavy cloud slowly gathering in the sky, until you realize you can no longer see the sun. My grandson continued to act strangely, and the more I observed, the clearer it became. It wasn't a phase, it wasn't just a tantrum, it wasn't simply tiredness from school. Something much deeper was happening inside him. One evening, I was in the kitchen washing the dishes after dinner. The house was quiet, with that typical end-of-day silence, broken only by the sound of running water and some distant noises from the street. My son-in-law and daughter had gone out to take care of something quick, and my grandson had gone to his room, supposedly to play or watch some cartoons. As always, I was thinking about him. With each dish rinsed, my mind returned to the last few days. The averted glances, the constant sighs, his withdrawn manner. It was as if someone had extinguished part of the light in his spirit, and that hurt me in a way I couldn't explain. A child that age shouldn't be carrying the weight I saw on his shoulders. That's when I heard it. A low, muffled sound. At first, I thought it was the television turning on by itself for some reason. Then, I thought it was just some noise from the street, but as I paid attention, I realized that it wasn't just simple noise. It was a sound I knew very well, because it had come from my own chest many times. Stifled crying. I dropped the plate in the sink without even finishing rinsing it. I slowly turned off the tap and stood there for a few seconds, trying to confirm. The sound came again, a short sob, the kind someone tries to hide, as if ashamed to cry. It was coming from the hallway. It was coming from his room. My heart raced. I walked slowly without making a sound, not because I wanted to spy, but because I knew that if he noticed me approaching, he might fall silent and bury his pain even deeper inside. And I couldn't bear the thought of remaining in the dark. I needed to understand what was happening. When I got close to the half-open door, I saw a scene that broke my heart. My grandson was sitting on the floor beside the bed, his knees drawn up to his chest. He was hugging his legs tightly, his face hidden, his body trembling slightly. His shoulders rose and fell in rhythm with the sobs he was trying to stifle. There was no television on, no toys scattered around at that moment, just him and his own anguish. I could have rushed in right then and there, hugged him and told him everything was all right, but for a few seconds, I just watched him, not out of coldness, but because I perceived the intensity of what he was feeling. It was as if he were carrying guilt, fear, an excess of thoughts that a child shouldn't have. Then something else caught my attention even more. In the corner of the room, partially hidden by the half-open closet door, was a small replica, a blue cardboard toy box, painted by himself. I recognized the sketches, the crooked lines, the stains of dried paint. It was as if, somehow, he was reproducing, in miniature, the object that haunted him. The real box was in the hallway closet. The replica, there in his room, was like a material echo of what weighed on his mind. And he was crying, next to his own version of the box. That couldn't be a coincidence. I took a deep breath, knocked gently on the door, and spoke as softly as I could muster. "May I come in, my love?" He was startled, hurriedly wiped his face with his shirt sleeve and tried to smile. That crooked smile, wet with tears, was worse than if he had continued crying, because it was fake. It was a shield. "I'm fine, Grandma," he said, his voice breaking. "I was just thinking." No child cries like that, just thinking for no reason. I approached slowly, sat down beside him on the floor, saying nothing for a few seconds. Sometimes the comforting silence speaks louder than 1,000 questions. I gently placed my hand on his back, making slow, circular movements. I felt his heavy breathing, his eyes still moist. "You know you can talk to me, don't you?" I whispered. "About anything. Nothing you say will make me like you any less." He bit his lip. He glanced quickly at the cardboard box and looked away again. It was like a beacon flashing for me. The connection was right there, before my eyes. "I had a bad dream," he murmured. "About what?" He hesitated. He remained silent. He clenched his hands tightly, as if holding something invisible. Then, he simply shook his head in denial and repeated, "It doesn't matter." But it mattered. A lot. That same day, a few hours later, the phone rang. It was his teacher. She rarely called outside of meeting hours, so my heart braced itself for something serious. "Hi, how are you?" I tried to sound lighthearted, but my voice came out a little tense. On the other end of the line, the teacher sighed before speaking. "I wanted to talk a little about your grandson. Have you noticed any changes in his behavior at home?" My chest tightened instantly. I knew it wasn't my imagination. It wasn't an exaggeration. It wasn't something I was imagining. "Yes, I do," I replied. "He's been quieter, more anxious. He always seems worried." She agreed on the other side. "The same thing is happening here at school. He, who used to participate in everything, now isolates himself a bit. He gets distracted, stares into space. Sometimes he starts crying out of nowhere and says he can't talk. I ask him what's wrong, but he avoids the subject, saying that if he talks, it will be worse." Those words pierced me like a knife. It's going to get worse. So there was fear. It wasn't just sadness. It wasn't just insecurity. It was a real, concrete fear, almost as if he believed there were consequences for telling the truth. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. Did he mention anything specific? A name? A place? A situation? "No," the teacher replied sadly. "He only says that he doesn't want anyone to get hurt, and that he doesn't want Grandma to be sad." It was as if someone had pulled the rug out from under me. He was holding back because of me. He was carrying something that was consuming him to prevent me from suffering. When I hung up the phone, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared blankly for a few minutes. The house was silent, but my mind was in turmoil. The pieces were beginning to fall into place in a cruel way. My grandson was afraid of the box. My grandson was crying alone in his room. My grandson had created his own version of the box next to his bed. My grandson used to say that if I spoke, it would be worse. My grandson didn't want that. I would get sad. It was as if he had locked his own pain, thrown the key somewhere in his heart, and decided that, to protect me, he needed to hurt himself in silence. And even without fully understanding, I felt, with painful clarity, that all of this was related to the mysterious blue box. Something inside her, or something connected to her history, was weighing on his soul. It was no longer just a forgotten object in a cupboard. It was a point of convergence. A secret that had been passed down through generations was now crushing a child's heart. And it was at that moment that I realized ignoring the situation was no longer an option. Pretending everything was fine, saying, "It will pass," hoping that one day he would simply get better. That would be a form of emotional abandonment. I loved him too much to let him sink alone. If the truth was connected to that box, then sooner or later, I would have to open it, no longer out of curiosity, but for love. That night was one of the longest of my life. I sat in the living room armchair after my grandson finally fell asleep, exhausted as if carrying that fear had drained all the energy a child should use to play, laugh, and exist without worries. The house was quiet, but my mind was a whirlwind. The silence seemed to speak to me, pushing thoughts I didn't want to face, but that I could no longer ignore. The blue box was just a few steps away from me, stored in the hallway. Closet. But its presence seemed to fill the entire house. It was as if it had become a living character in the story, a silent observer of everything that happened, pulsing in the dark, waiting to be confronted. I tried to push that feeling away, but the more I tried, the more it grew inside me. I closed my eyes and let the thoughts flow through me. Should I respect his request, or find out what's breaking my grandson's heart? That question echoed inside me like a painful mantra. It was like standing before two doors, both heavy, both difficult to open. On one hand, there was respect for his request. My grandson had never asked me for anything with so much fear, so much urgency, so much vulnerability. The simple fact that he said promise in that trembling voice was enough to make my heart hesitate. I had always taught him that promises are important, that trust is precious, that someone you love deserves to be heard. How could I break an implicit promise made to a child who was so clearly suffering? But on the other side, there was his pain, the real pain, which I saw in his eyes, in his hunched body, in his choked voice. The pain that made him cry in secret, that made him tremble, that made him build frightened replicas of the box inside his own room. The pain that the teacher had noticed, the pain that he tried to hide so as not to hurt me. And that's when the guilt started to weigh on my chest. If he was suffering, if he was being consumed by this fear, and I, as a grandmother, didn't try to understand, wouldn't I be failing him? I hugged myself, trying to warm myself as my thoughts came and went, clashing with each other. I felt as if I were being pulled in two directions, On one side, protection, on the other, truth, and both carried risks. I imagined myself opening the box and finding something he really didn't want me to see, something that could hurt, that could stir up my memories, my pain, losses I had buried years ago. What if the box held something about me, something my grandson had seen, heard, or imagined, something I wasn't emotionally prepared to revisit? The mere possibility made me uneasy. But then I thought about the last few weeks, the way he hugged me, always trembling, always as if he were about to collapse. The way he looked at me, as if he were asking for help but couldn't find the words, as if he were trapped in an emotional bubble that could only be broken if I had the courage to face it. Curiosity seemed to enter the room like a cold wind. Not that light, childlike curiosity, but a heavy, dark, almost painful curiosity. The curiosity of someone who knows, deep down, that there is a hidden truth and that ignoring it only prolongs the suffering. And along with it came fear. I'm afraid of hurting my grandson, fear of breaking their trust, fear of finding something that would change our lives forever. I was afraid to find out that he was suffering because of me, the kind of fear that grabs you by the hand and whispers, "Don't touch that." But then another voice came, a stronger, firmer, more maternal one. "He's just a child. If he's carrying a burden that's destroying him, you need to find out what it is." I teetered between these two forces like someone walking on an unstable bridge. Every step felt dangerous. Every thought felt like a choice between protecting or intervening. Then an image appeared before my eyes. My grandson that night, sitting next to his own blue cardboard box, crying softly, hugging his legs, trying to hide his face so that no one would see the pain he carried. That pierced me so deeply that I felt tears welling up in my eyes. I took several deep breaths, trying to find clarity, but there was no clarity to be found. There were only mixed feelings, so tangled that it would be impossible to separate them. Guilt, love, fear, instinct, responsibility, affection, everything pressed against me like a tight knot. I stood up slowly, as if my feet weighed more than usual. I walked into the hallway. Each step seemed to resonate inside my head, like a clock ticking down to something inevitable. The dim light illuminated the closet door, which stared back at me as if it were waiting for me. I placed my hand on the handle, and there I stood, motionless, for long seconds. It was as if the house held its breath along with me. Opening it meant breaking his order. Not opening it meant letting him suffer more, and I didn't know what was worse. My fingers began to tremble. I felt my heart pounding so hard it felt like it was trying to escape my chest. But I also felt something new rising within me, a kind of courage that is born when someone we love is in danger. I thought to myself under my breath, I'm not doing this for myself, I'm doing it for him. But even so, the guilt was still there, present, heavy, hot. I knelt down slowly, my face close to the closet door, and whispered to myself, unable to hold back the tears, if this box is hurting my grandson, then I need to know why, even if it hurts, even if it makes him angry, even if it changes everything. At that moment, the decision no longer seemed like a choice. It seemed like destiny. It seemed like something I would have to face sooner or later. And somewhere between fear and love, I finally understood. Opening the box wasn't about curiosity. It was about saving my grandson's heart, even if it cost me. That night felt different from the moment the sun disappeared behind the trees. The whole house was enveloped in a dense, almost palpable stillness, as if even the wind had decided to stop and observe what was about to happen. I tried to follow my routine as usual, preparing tea, tidying the kitchen, checking if the doors were locked, but everything seemed to happen at a strange pace, as if time were slower, thicker, too uncomfortable to ignore. My grandson had fallen asleep early, exhausted after another day filled with anxiety. I watched him for a few minutes before leaving the room. He slept curled up, as if protecting himself even in his dreams. His breathing oscillated between calm and restless, and I felt, more than saw, that something was pursuing him even while he slept. I kissed his forehead and closed the door slowly. That's when I noticed the silence in the house. Absolute silence. A silence that was unnatural. There was no noise from cars on the street. There was no wind blowing against the windows. There were no creaking sounds from the wooden floor. It was as if the world had fallen silent to watch what I would do. I walked into the room. The lights were off, except for the dim light from the lamp in the corner, which cast long shadows, jagged outlines that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. I tried to keep my mind steady, but it was impossible not to feel that something, a silent presence, was lingering there with me. And then, there at the end of the hallway, as if calling my name without uttering a single syllable, I felt the box. I heard nothing. I saw nothing. But I felt it. That strange feeling had been growing for days, as if the forgotten object carried an energy I had never perceived before. It wasn't supernatural. It wasn't fantasy. But it was emotional. The box seemed to vibrate emotionally in the space, as if my grandson's pain were imbued in it. That's what made me get up from the armchair. I knew what I needed to do. I knew it would be a long night. I knew that when dawn broke, nothing would be the same. I took a deep breath, wiped my nervous hands on the fabric of my nightgown, and walked down the hallway. Each step echoed inside me like a symbolic step toward a hidden truth. The floor felt colder than usual. The hallway, narrower. The closet door, taller and darker than I remembered. I approached. For a moment, I hesitated. My heart was pounding erratically, so loudly it felt like it was filling my ears. I touched the doorknob with my fingertips. The wood was cold. The door opened with a long, drawn-out creak, as if the cupboard itself were waking up after years of slumber. The smell of old wood immediately rose, mixed with the faint aroma of dust that accompanies objects carrying stories too long to be forgotten. And there she was, the blue box, property, silent, observer. Even without eyes, I could feel that she was staring at me. I knelt down slowly. My legs were weak, and my hands trembled so much that I had to support them on the floor before proceeding. I ran my fingers over the rough surface of the box. The touch sent a shiver down my spine and through my entire body. The old texture, the worn paint, the scratches, everything seemed more intense that night. Beside it, held by an almost invisible ribbon, was the key. The small, old metal key, which I had never noticed before. How could I not remember it? How long had it been there? It was impossible to know. Time seems to have a strange way of hiding things until the exact moment you need to find them. I picked up the key carefully. It was light, but it seemed laden with meaning, as if it weren't just a piece of metal, but a link existed between me and an event that was yet to be revealed. I sat on the floor, my back against the wooden cabinet. The box rested on my legs. The key was in my hand, and the silence around me was so intense it seemed to have transformed into an invisible wall. The guilt came like a wave. The image of my grandson saying, "Don't open it," came flooding back to my mind. His trembling voice, his eyes full of fear, the plea of a child who clearly believed he was protecting me. It was as if each recent memory was trying to pull my hand away from the box, as if saying, "Don't do that, not now." But then came the heartbreaking image. He, huddled in his room, crying in secret, hugging her own legs, squinting, trying to carry the weight of something that wasn't meant for their age. And then, there was no choice left. The truth needed to be found. His pain needed to be deciphered. I brought the key close to the lock. My hands were shaking so much that I had to take several deep breaths before touching the metal piece to the hole. The key made a small click as it went in, as if it fit perfectly, as if you had waited for that moment your whole life. My heart raced. I turned slowly. The sound of the key turning was inexplicably loud in the silence of the house. A sharp, ancient noise, like the sound of a whisper being cut off. It felt as if the very air held its breath, along with me. The lid trembled slightly. Suspense gripped my entire body. A shiver ran from the base of his spine to the nape of his neck. My hands were sweating profusely. I held the lid with my fingertips. I only pushed a little. The wood creaked. My heart was racing so fast it felt like something was going to burst inside me. And there, in that split second when the box began to open, I felt a profound truth. It wasn't just the box that opened. It was an old wound. It was a well-kept secret. It was the beginning of a revelation that would change everything. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes for a moment to gather strength, and I pushed the lid all the way down. When the lid finally opened, for a second I saw nothing. Not because the box was empty, but because my eyes were too watery, as if a fog had formed between me and what I was about to see. I took a deep breath, trying to stabilize my vision, and then slowly, the shapes began to take shape. The first thing I saw was photos. And these weren't old family photos, the kind you keep without much thought. They were photos specifically of my grandson, even younger, with a rounder face, messier hair, that wide smile that took up half his face. He appeared in various situations, sitting on the sofa with a blanket on his lap, looking out the window, eating pancakes in the kitchen, hugging a pillow, sleeping in my lap. I recognized all those scenes. And yet, I didn't remember anyone taking those photos. I picked up the first one carefully. On the back, a shaky date, written in childish handwriting, and a short phrase. That day, I felt that Grandma was sad. My chest tightened. I picked up another one. He was in the yard, holding a toy. On the back, I wanted to ask you if you still liked me. It was like getting punched in the stomach. Each photo held a record, a phrase, an attempt to preserve a moment that, for me, might have been just another ordinary day. But, for him, it was the day something hurt. The day he perceived a distance, a change, an absence. While going through the photos, I noticed that some were a little crumpled, as if they had been squeezed by small hands, perhaps during a cry. Others had stains of something that looked like dried tears. He hadn't just kept photos. He had kept feelings. Below the photos, there was tickets folded, hastily written on torn notebook paper, in that crooked handwriting of a child still discovering the world of words. My hands trembled as I unfolded the first. 1. Grandma, I don't want you to leave forever. Other. If you forget about me, I will miss you terribly. Another one, with even messier handwriting, as if it had been written while crying. I promise to be better if you stay with me longer. The ground seemed to open up beneath my feet. Those words were small in size, but enormous in pain. It was as if each note was a desperate attempt to hold on to something he thought was slipping through his fingers. My love. I remembered the many times I had to go to the doctor, the appointments, the exams, the nights I arrived late and found him already asleep. I remembered the times I said, Grandma is tired today. We'll play tomorrow, okay? Without imagining that, in his little head, that could sound like, you don't matter that much today. I never said that. Never. But children sometimes interpret what we don't explain. Underneath the tickets were the designs, and that's when I really started crying. The drawings were simple, with childlike strokes, but they carried more truth than many adult speeches. In one of them, there were 2 figures, a larger one, clearly me, and a smaller one, him. Between us, a large wavy line, like a river, and on the other side of the bank, he had written, in irregular letters, please don't forget me. In another, he drew a house. In the window, a boy is alone. Below the phrase, I hope you come back. There was one that particularly hurt me. I was drawn lying in bed, with several pills beside me. He was standing next to the bed, with tears streaming down his face. Above all, a question. Are you going to disappear? Each drawing was a silent confession, a conversation he wanted to have, but didn't know how. A way to talk to me without using his voice. Perhaps afraid of the answer. Perhaps afraid of seeming weak. Perhaps afraid of hearing no. Tears began to fall uncontrollably. They streamed down my face, my neck, and dripped onto the box lid. I tried to wipe them away, but it seemed that the more I read, the more I cried. That's when I saw what was at the bottom. One old tablet. It was one of those phones that almost nobody uses anymore, with a slightly scratched screen. It was there, silent, as if waiting for the right moment to speak. My heart raced. I carefully picked up the phone, my hands trembling, and noticed a small sticker on the back, written in childish handwriting, play if you ever open the box. My whole body shivered. I knew at that moment that this would be the final La Mandawa blow, the hardest truth, the voice I needed to hear, but which I simultaneously feared with all my might. I took a deep breath, turned on the device, and waited. The screen took a while to light up. It was an old, forgotten device, just like the box itself. But finally, a folder appeared on the screen with a single video, named with another shaky letter, for Grandma. I touched it. The image gradually appeared. It was my grandson's face, even smaller than he is today. He was sitting in my living room, exactly where I used to tell him stories. His eyes were already full of tears even before he started speaking. He took a deep breath, as if he were rehearsing his courage, and then he said, if you're seeing this, it's because I thought you didn't love me anymore. I put my hand to my mouth, trying to stifle a sob. He continued, his voice weak but sincere. I made this box to keep the memories I felt when I missed you, when you couldn't come, when you were tired, when you said you were going to be away for a while because of the doctors. I was afraid you would forget about me. I was afraid you would leave forever. His tears streamed down the screen. Mine fell on the floor of the house. I know adults have serious things to deal with. Mom always says that, but I don't know how to explain it. I just miss you. Sometimes I think if I disappear, nobody will notice. But I don't want you to disappear. I made this box to keep everything I wanted to tell you. He swallowed, hard, looked straight at the camera, and somehow straight at me, years later. If you opened the box, it means something happened. I'm scared, very scared. But I also hope that, if you saw it, you'll remember that I love you, and that I just wanted to make sure you love me too. The video ended without an elaborate farewell. He simply pressed his lips together, as if holding back tears, and the recording cut off. I stood there, clutching the tablet to my chest, sobbing. It was as if time had stopped, as if the whole house had vanished, as if only I, that box, and the pain of my grandson remained, reverberating throughout every corner of my soul. At that moment, I understood why he was so afraid of me opening the box. It wasn't just about the content itself. It was about what that content represented. For him, the box was the embodiment of a period of fear, insecurity, and a feeling of abandonment. It was the place where he dumped everything he didn't have the courage to tell me. It was the hiding place for the questions he didn't ask aloud. It was the repository of his fear of losing my love. And now that I had seen everything, it was clear. I hadn't just opened a box. I had opened my grandson's heart. And that broke my heart. I cried. I cried for several minutes, perhaps a whole hour. I cried for the times I failed unintentionally, for the times I was absent, even while trying my best, for the times I failed to see the pain hidden behind a child's smile. But amidst the tears, a certainty began to grow. I couldn't change the past, but from that moment on, I could, and I would, change the future. When the crying finally began to subside, I still held the box in my lap as if it were a fragile, vulnerable newborn who needed to be understood, not judged. The truth was there before me, scattered in photos, notes, drawings, and that painful video. But to fully understand what had happened to my grandson's heart, I needed to take a few steps back, revisit memories, connect the dots, remember moments that had previously seemed small, but now took on a completely different meaning. And, in reconstructing everything, the truth emerged as clear as it was cruel. My grandson thought I was distancing myself from him, and not because I wanted to, but that's because I was sick, and he hadn't understood. I remembered the times I had to be hospitalized, the nights I couldn't visit him because he was under observation, the long appointments, the strong medications, the days when the pain kept me in bed. I also remembered the times my children talked in the hallway, trying to whisper, believing the children weren't listening. I remembered the tiredness in my voice when I answered calls, the "we'll play later," the weaker hugs, the canceled visits. For an adult, those were difficult but understandable times. For a child, they were silent earthquakes. And worse, there was something else, something I had suspected for weeks. Someone had said something to him. After watching the video, an old memory came rushing back. I remembered a specific afternoon, months ago, when I went to the hospital for important tests. I had left in a hurry, and I remember that, before closing the door, I heard my daughter saying to my grandson, "Grandma is very sick. We don't know how long she'll be well." I never forgot her tone, worried, tired, distressed. But only now did I realize my grandson was on the stairs, listening to every word, not fully, understanding its meaning, but grasping the worst part. I don't know how long. For an adult, this phrase is worrying. For a child, it brings terror. After that came the comments that adults blurt out without thinking, believing that children don't understand. Comments like, "Her health is getting worse. She needs to rest. We don't know if she's going to get better. It's becoming increasingly difficult for her to see the boy all the time." And there was something else, something I only discovered days later, but which already made sense at that moment. He heard a relative say, thinking he was whispering, "Hopefully he won't get too attached to her mother. It will hurt less when she..." Well, anyway. A random sentence, an impulsive statement, a destructive phrase. That's when everything fell into place. For my grandson, it wasn't just about illness. It was about abandonment. It was about loss. It was about rejection. And the blue box, that old, forgotten, silent box, became the only place where he felt he could keep his fear without scaring anyone. She became his love capsule, a place where she put everything she didn't know how to say, photos of happy moments, to remember that there was true love. These drawings express longing, a way to record my fear of losing myself, the insecurity notes, to capture what he couldn't confess, and the video, that painful video, made with courage, like a cry for help that might never reach me. The box was his safe haven, and at the same time, it was a symbol of his pain, because, while he was pouring love into it, it also harbored fear. Fear of being forgotten, fear of being rejected, the fear of waking up one day and discovering that I wouldn't be there anymore. A child's pain is silent, and that's what makes it all the more devastating. They don't know how to translate complex feelings. They don't know how to explain uncertainties. They don't know how to differentiate between physical absence and emotional absence. For him, seeing me in the hospital, tired, weak, with less time and energy, meant only one thing. He was losing his grandmother. And worse, he thought the blame was shared, because children, when they don't understand the world, try to explain it with the little they have. And in his heart, the explanation was simple and profoundly wrong. Grandma is leaving because I'm not good enough, or because she doesn't want to be with me anymore. That was why each ticket carried promises to be better. That's why the drawings showed him alone at the window. That was why the photos were dated with comments about my sadness. That's why the video said, "I thought you didn't love me anymore." And now, everything made sense. The hidden crying, anxiety at school, the frightened behavior, the replica of the box in his room, a desperate plea for me not to open it. It was as if the box had become a final emotional refuge. If I opened it, he believed he could see the final proof of abandonment. His fear was confirmed, or worse, that upon opening it, I would be angry, disappointed, hurt, that I would reject all of that, and, consequently, reject him. He was afraid of what I would do with the contents of the box. Fear of being ridiculed, fear of having their feelings exposed, fear of not being loved in return. That's why he protected that lid so much. That's why he looked away. That's why he was trembling. The box was not just an object, it was his heart, and he was terrified at the idea that someone might mess around in there. Realizing this was like having my chest ripped open, because the truth is, I never wanted to walk away. I never wanted to make him feel alone. I never wanted him to think, not for a second, that my love for him had diminished. But the illness, the fatigue, the lost time, the hectic life, all of that mixed together, creating shadows that he, too small, couldn't interpret rationally. His pain was no joke. That was no exaggeration. It wasn't made up. It was the fruit of a heart that loves more than it understands. And now I needed to do the impossible, to repair something he built alone, in the dark, with fear and hope. I needed to show, not just say, that there had never been any rejection, that there was never abandonment, that there has never been a lack of love. There was only one sick grandmother, and a boy trying not to lose the person he loved most. And that night, as I held each note with a broken heart, I realized opening the box had been painful, but necessary, essential. The box showed me the wound, and now, finally, I could begin to heal her. From that point on, nothing would ever be the same, but perhaps, just perhaps, it could be better, more true, stronger, more sincere, because now I knew what my grandson had carried alone for so long, and I swore to myself he would never again carry this pain alone. I knew I couldn't wait until the next day, not after what I'd seen, not after hearing his trembling voice in that video, confessing such great fears for such a small heart. I needed to talk to him, not as an adult trying to give ready-made answers, but as someone who was finally seeing the pain he had been carrying in silence. I closed the box slowly, like someone closing an open wound, and held it with both hands. It was strange to realize how much heavier it seemed now, not because of the objects inside, but because of what they represented. It was as if I were holding his heart, fragile, anxious, throbbing with fear and love at the same time. I took a deep breath, wiped the last tears from my face, and walked to his room. Each step felt like a journey, and my mind repeated it like a mantra, carefully, with affection, without rushing, without pressure. The door was ajar. I pushed it open slowly. He was awake, sitting on the bed, eyes wide, hugging a teddy bear as if it were a shield against the world. It seemed he had sensed something, as if his pain and mine were now linked by an invisible thread. When he saw me standing in the doorway, holding the blue box against my chest, time stopped. His eyes immediately filled with tears. He didn't say anything, but something inside him collapsed. He let go of the bear. He stood up slowly. He took 2 steps towards me, and, unable to hold back, she began to cry. It wasn't an ordinary cry. It was a cry that came from deep within, the kind a child holds back until their body can't take it anymore. Quick sobs, gasping breaths, trembling hands. He ran to me and clung to my legs so tightly it seemed like he was afraid I would disappear at that very moment. "Grandma," the voice came out crushed between sobs. You opened." I bent down, placing the box on the floor. I held his face between my hands. "My love," she said in a velvety voice, fighting back emotion. "Look at me." He lifted his face, his eyes filled with panic. "I didn't want you to see," he murmured, trembling. "I didn't want you to be sad. I didn't want to lose you." My heart broke again. I pulled him into a hug, a long, tight hug, the kind that says what words can't express. He rested his face on my shoulder and cried some more, as if releasing months of pent-up fear. Are you leaving?" he asked, his voice breaking. "Mom said you were sick. Auntie said she didn't know how long you'd last. I heard you talking quietly, and, he sniffled. I thought you weren't coming back." I felt like I couldn't breathe. "Hey," I said, pulling away just enough to look him in the eyes. "Look at me, my love. I'm here. I'm with you. I've never left you, and I won't." He shook his head, still crying, trying to believe, trying to understand. "But you stayed away. You were tired. You didn't want to play." He pressed his chest with his hands, as if trying to physically explain what he felt. I thought you didn't like me anymore." That was like a stab wound. I cupped his little face in my hands, feeling his skin warm from crying so much. "I was sick," I replied honestly. "My body was weak. I had no energy. But it was never, ever, because I didn't want you. It was never because I didn't love you. It was just tiredness, my angel. That's all." He took a deep breath, trying to absorb my words. "But I saw you were sad," he whispered. "And when you're sad, I get scared. Scared that you'll leave." More tears streamed down my face. "I understand, and I'm so sorry," I replied, my voice trembling. "I'm so sorry if I ever made you feel unloved. You are the most precious thing in Grandma's life. You are my heart outside my body." He snuggled into my embrace, and I felt his hands gripping my shirt tightly. "I made the box because I didn't know how to say it," he confessed. "It was to keep when I missed you, and when I was afraid you would disappear." I stroked his hair with slow, comforting movements. "The box is beautiful," I said. "Not because of what's inside, but because it shows how much you love me, and I love you just the same. See you later." He took a deep breath, sobbing less, but still vulnerable. "You weren't angry, were you?" "Angry?" I smiled, a smile wet with tears. "My love, you did all this because you were afraid, because you loved me so much that you didn't know how to deal with the possibility of losing me. How could I be angry?" He lowered his head, biting his lip. "I was afraid that you would see me and not want to see me anymore." My chest tightened as if someone were holding my heart tightly. "Look at me," I asked again. He looked up, and in that instant, everything I needed was there. The insecurity, the vulnerability, the need to be loved, and the courage to admit it all. "You'll never lose me," I said slowly, with all the conviction I had. "Never. Not even if I'm sick. Not even if I'm tired. Not even if I'm far away. You're as much a part of my life as air is a part of the world. You will never, never be forgotten." He collapsed again. But this time, the crying was different. It wasn't fear. It was a relief. He cried in my lap like a child who had finally found his way back home after getting lost in the forest. And I hugged him as if I were rebuilding a part of him, a part that had silently broken. "I just wanted you to stay with me," he said, his voice small and sincere. "I'll stay," I replied, "as long as I can. And when I can't, you'll know why, and you won't have to imagine the worst. Because now, we talk about what we feel. Together. Without hidden boxes. Without fear." He squeezed my neck and murmured, "I love you, Grandma." And I felt something inside me align, as if the box had finally fulfilled its purpose. Not to separate, but to unite. Not to keep secrets, but to reveal what had been kept hidden for too long. I kissed him on the head and replied, "I love you more than you can imagine." And in that long, healing embrace, I knew. Even though the box had been a symbol of pain, that night, she had become a symbol of truth. And finally, my grandson was no longer alone within himself. We stayed there, embraced on the bedroom floor, as if time had decided to stop, just to allow us to breathe again. His crying gradually subsided, turning into spaced sobs, and mine slowed down too, although there were still tears streaming down my face. It was as if we were both cleansing our souls, removing layers of fear, insecurity, and accumulated silence. His hug was tight, the kind that seems to say, "Don't let me go," and I didn't let go. I ran my hand down his back, slowly and repeatedly, a gesture that had always calmed him since he was a baby. I felt his warm little face pressed against my shoulder, his breath faltering as he tried to compose himself. And with each passing second, something inside both of us was reorganizing itself, like pieces of a puzzle finally finding their place. "I missed you so much, Grandma," he murmured softly, as if afraid the words might hurt, even though they were so true. I closed my eyes, pulling him even closer to me. "I felt it too," I replied, my voice soft but firm. "Even when I couldn't be here with you, I thought about you every single day, without exception." He stepped back a little, just enough to wipe his eyes with his shirt sleeve, and then he looked at me with that vulnerable look that only children can, like someone searching for an answer capable of rewriting the entire world. "Will you stay with me more now?" he asked, almost whispering. The question struck me like a bolt of lightning. It wasn't a whim, it wasn't excessive dependence, it was a plea. A desperate plea for emotional security, a plea from someone who had lived in doubt for too long. I held her little hands between mine, as if I were holding something sacred. "Yes, I'll stay. But I promise you something even more important. I'll explain when I can't. I won't disappear. I won't leave you imagining the worst. We'll talk. Always. You won't carry this fear alone anymore. I promise." He took a deep breath, feeling each word slowly enter his wounded little heart, which was beginning to heal at that moment. I continued, "I'm better now, stronger, and I'm going to take care of my health so I can be there for you. But I also want you to understand one thing." He looked at me intently. "Even when I'm tired, even when I need to rest, it has nothing to do with you. Nothing. You haven't done anything wrong. You haven't made my life harder. On the contrary, you've always made my days lighter." His eyes filled with tears again, but now they were different tears, not of fear, but of relief. He approached slowly and rested his forehead against mine. "I was so scared," she confessed. "Scared you would leave and I wouldn't have told you that I loved you." My heart tightened in a sweet and painful way at the same time. "I know, my love, but now you've said it, and I heard you, and I can promise you one thing." He looked up, waiting. "Nothing, absolutely nothing in the world will make me stop loving you. Not illness, not distance, not time, nothing. You are a part of me, and you always will be." He let out a deep sigh, so deep it felt like his first real breath after months of living within his own anxiety. Then he threw himself into my lap, without fear, without hesitation. I embraced him as one embraces life itself, and there we stayed, swaying gently, feeling our hearts realign again. After a few minutes, he raised his face. "Grandma, can I ask you a question?" "Sure. You were sad when you saw the box?" The question carried guilt, insecurity, and hope. It was as if he were checking if, by showing his vulnerability, he hadn't done something wrong. I ran my thumb along the corner of his eye. "I was touched," I replied honestly, "because you put very precious things in the box. Your feelings, your longing, your love. That didn't make me sad for you. It made me proud that you have such a beautiful heart. It only hurt me to know that you suffered alone." He bit his lip. "I thought that, if I spoke, you would get even more tired." That hit me again, hard. "Oh, my love, listening to you never tires me. Never. No matter the subject, no matter the fear, no matter the time. I will always want to know how you feel." He nodded slowly, as if mentally recording a truth that will serve as a refuge in the future. We sat together on the bed. He held my hand so firmly that I felt his warm fingers intertwining with mine. The room was silent, but it was no longer the heavy silence of anxiety. It was the light, comforting silence of someone who finally feels safe. "The box," he murmured, looking at it on the floor. "Can we handle it together? Now? That I don't have to be afraid?" I smiled, a smile filled with tears and relief. "Yes, we can, but only if you want to. Now she's no longer a secret. Now she's just part of our story, and we're going to turn that story into something good. You and I. Together." He came closer, rested his face on my shoulder, and said, in the softest voice I'd ever heard from him, "Thank you for not leaving me." My throat tightened. It was as if, at that moment, he was closing the door to an old pain and opening a new window. Clear, illuminated, light. "I've never been," I replied, "and I never will be." The hug we shared after that wasn't just a hug, it was a silent promise, a shared cure, an emotional rebirth. Two hearts, once wounded by misunderstandings and silences, now beat in the same rhythm, with more truth, more love, more presence. And there, in that small bed covered in drawings stuck to the wall, I knew. The blue box had opened wounds, but it had also opened new paths, conversation paths, paths to healing, paths of love. It was a conversation that not only transformed him, it transformed both of us. The blue box now lay open before me, no longer a heavy secret, but a mirror, an emotional mirror reflecting everything my grandson and I had, left unsaid to each other over the course of months. It wasn't just an old object, forgotten at the back of a cupboard. It was a symbol, a reminder, living proof that silent feelings can create entire universes within a child, even when adults believe that everything is fine. As I observed each note, each drawing, and each photo calmly scattered on the bed, something profound settled within me, a truth I had never perceived with such clarity as in that moment. Sometimes, what a child keeps in a box is more real than what an adult keeps in their heart, because we adults learn to hide the pain, to mask the sadness, to postpone important conversations. We learn to say, "I'll explain later. It's nothing. It's okay." We create invisible boxes inside ourselves, not made of wood, not of peeling paint, but boxes of silence, of lack of time, of absence. Boxes where we push emotions we don't want to face. As for the children, children don't know how to hide it. They transform pain into drawing. They transform longing into a note. They transform fear into cherished photos. They transform insecurity into little phrases scribbled on the back of any image. They don't silence their hearts. They try to organize them as best they can with the resources they have. And my grandson, in that vulnerable moment, had created the box as a desperate plea for love, attention, and permanence. It was his way of saying, "I'm scared, but I'm also trying to understand you. Please don't leave me alone." Looking at that box now, after everything we've talked about, after the tears, after the hug that reconnected us, was like looking at a bridge. It brought us together. It saved us. The blue box saved our relationship not because it contained objects, but because it contained truths. Truths he was afraid to tell. Truths I was afraid to see. Truths that only found their way out when the lid finally opened. I realized then how important it is to listen, to truly listen to what is left unsaid. The sadness hidden in a look, the sudden change in behavior, the long silences, the hugs that are too tight, the muffled cries in the room, the way a child holds an adult's hand when afraid of losing them. Listening is not just hearing words. Listening is about understanding what's happening behind the scenes. It's about seeing what lies in the space between one smile and the next, and pay attention. Attention isn't just about being in the same house. It's about being present. It's about being available. It's about being sensitive. Because affection, true affection, isn't built solely on grand moments. It's built on small gestures, a caring look, an "I'm here," a lingering hug, a simple conversation before bed. And that's what I understood that night. The blue box was not just a symbol of his pain, it was the symbol of my reunion with him. She reminded me that, even with my limitations, my illness, my tiring routine, my grandson needs something that only I can give: emotional presence. Not perfection, not constant force, not heroism. Presence, sincere, available, aware. He didn't want me to be invincible. He just wanted to know that I wasn't going to disappear. And now, looking back, I'm grateful for the box. She showed me where I had failed without realizing it. She showed me where he suffered without telling me. She showed me where our bond needed to be restored. But above all, she showed me one of the greatest truths I've ever felt as a grandmother. Sometimes, love isn't in what we say. It's not what we keep. And that's what we finally decided to reveal. When I closed the box, this time without fear, without guilt, without mystery, I felt I was closing a cycle of pain to open a cycle of healing. My grandson was beside me, holding my hand, his gaze serene for the first time in a long time, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that I would never again allow him to carry such heavy feelings alone. Love has many forms, but some of them only reveal themselves when we have the courage to listen to the silence. And on that day, we both listened. We both feel it. We both came back to each other. The blue box was, in the end, a love story. Sad, yes, but profoundly true. And now it was also a story of hope, healing, and reconnection. If this story touched you in any way, please like and subscribe to the channel. This helps me bring you more exciting stories like this one. And tell me in the comments, what do you think your grandchild would hide in a box like this?